Good day, everyone. I came across this comic book last week, and I want to share my thoughts of the book with you. And I'll take you through the first three issues and give you my general impression as I read them. It's the Puma Blues, the issue number 1, and it was by Stephen Murphy and Michael Zulli. Start to read the book, and you see a man, and the year is 1997, and he's in Boston. And he's just been through therapy, various therapists actually, none of which have been successful. And he comes across a man who was once living in the Bronx. And when he sees the man, all his anger that he has, he takes it out on this innocent man. He starts beating him, and he makes him sing a song, Running Blue by the Doors. And then the scene changes, and it's not a bat. What you see there, it's a manta ray, and yes, it's flying through the air. And now you have the same man, and his name is Davia Immer, and he's in the forest, and there's a puma in the background. The same young man you saw who assaulted that poor man. But now we are in the year 2000, 3 years later. He goes into the place he's staying at, turns on the TV, and MTV is on. When MTV played videos. He goes on the roof, and he starts playing with a satellite. And he starts just daydreaming as the satellite gears up. In the morning, he's woken up by the same television, which is not just television, but it's also his means of communication with the outside world. And the outside world communicates with him. And this is where we learn that he works for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And he's being given his orders. That the reservoir he is watching is about to be, some lime is about to be aerially lime is just about to be added into the water to counteract the radiation in the water. That switches off, and then he gets a call from his mother. And his mother asks first how he is, and he can't talk about his job very much. And then she asked if he has watched his dad's videotape. Apparently his father made many VHS tapes, and he said he hadn't yet. And this is where we learn, again, this is the year 2000, we learn first that the Soviets have a lunar base, but contact has been lost with the base, and no one knows why. The first passenger space shuttle service has been created, and the people behind it are Rupert Murdoch, who, as we know today, is behind Fox News and the owner of the Wall Street Journal, and Robert Guccione, the founder of Penthouse. We also learned that the Iraq-Iran war continues, and of course we know that in the 80s, when that war was in its early stages, the United States, we were on the side of Iraq, providing with weapons and with chemical weapons, which they used against the Iranians. And then we hear about overpopulation as a problem, and there are suggestions of maybe providing some kind of birth control device into the water and the food of third world countries to make the people there infertile. And then we see the young man reaching into a box and pulling out VHSs. Issue number 1. Issue number 2. Here we have the young man's father, who is deceased, making his making his tape. He gets this before YouTube. I mean, obviously it is before YouTube, but he's just giving his thoughts on VHS. And there's his mother in the background. And who do we see on the tape? The President of the United States is Jack Kemp. Jack Kemp was a congressman from New York who in 1996 was the vice presidential candidate for the Republican Party with Senator Bob Dole when they challenged Bill Clinton and Al Gore. And then you see a quote from Richard David Attenborough, from the late Muammar Gaddafi from Libya, Richard Butler from the Aryan Nation, and these are real life people, Irv Rubin from the Jewish Defense League, and Iggy Pop singing Eat or Be Eaten. Again, these are the tapes the father made. And the year is 1995, April 20th, 1995. And it says GOP 96. So the Republican Party is having a convention there, where President Kemp is about to speak. But something goes terribly wrong. Kemp is suddenly taken prisoner by the Fraternal Freedom Fighters. They are a nativist group, and I'll paraphrase here. The leader says that the United States has been taken over by zombies, people glued to their television, and also that it's being taken over by homosexuals, although that's not the word he uses, immigrants, although those aren't the words he uses, African Americans, but that's not the word he uses either, and that America needs to basically go back to its Christian foundation, and that Jesus Christ was Caucasian or white. But then someone there and in the audience takes out a gun and shoots him, but it doesn't kill the man. And it's at this point that the man who got shot, the leader of this terrorist group, it's some kind of right-wing group, he's got a bomb, which he detonates in the Bronx. And it's a nuclear bomb. And the Bronx is gone. Now here's the our protagonist's father wearing this mask, and he says this happened on April 20th, 1995, and he asks his son who was born on this date 106 years before. I think you guys can figure out who that man was. Excuse me. And finally, issue number 3. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped the part. This story stops here, but then we have like an epilogue where you have this woman being carried up by her chauffeur, but the chauffeur is an android. And as they're driving, the woman asks him to stop. She sees the flowers, or is it the can? And she asks the chauffeur to pick it up. It's the flowers that she wants. Now issue number 3, which continues the story of the woman and the android. And the android looks out across the field into the forest, and it's contemplating leaving. And it's the reservoir that Gavia Immer is watching, looking over. And he asks permission if he can go, and the woman lets him. Now we change, and we meet somebody else. We have this dream sequence of a marriage, atomic bomb going off, death. And the man who had the dream is his professor, sharing his dream with his class of nuclear Armageddon. And then we see Gavia's mother hailing the cab. And we see young man in gas masks. We meet the android again, but now he's fraternizing with the wildlife. And we go back to Gavia, watching his father's videos on VHS. We see the professor at a bar. He goes into the restroom, and a man hands him a letter. Well, not a letter, an envelope. And there's a picture of a flying manta ray. And finally, the father's video discussing Christian evangelicals discussing the rapture and their belief in how the rapture works. God's chosen, and those that are not are left behind. The Puma Blues, issue number 3. This comic was published between 1986 and 1989, and 23 issues were published. Although I've seen somewhere that there was 24, but the 24 was not complete. The series did not end. It was just canceled. Issue number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 is interesting because it has different artists and writers working on the comic book. And quickly, people that are working on the comic, the glare doesn't help, are Stephen Bissett, Chester Brown, Dan Day, Dave Sim, Peter Laird, Timothy Truman, Dan Berger, Dick Russell, Jim Lawson, David Roman, Tom Sutton, Tom Veitch, Alan Moore, Eric Talbot, Peter Laird, Rick Veitch again, Ryan Brown, among others, contribute their own stories. '21, 22, and the last issue, 23. Now, by the time we reach issue 21, actually issue 19, the story goes in a Ken Russell direction. Ken Russell, the filmmaker. When our hero leaves the reservoir and heads out west to visit the places where he goes to Nevada, New Mexico, where we did our first experiments with the atomic bomb. And the artwork by Zulli throughout this is extraordinary. Again, the story was published between 86 and 89, and the 80s was the age of anxiety regarding the Cold War. President Reagan had been quoted, I think, on a visit to Israel, where he attended with Christians, and it was suggested that he believed, I don't know if it's accurate, but that he believed that what some Christians believe, that war with the Middle East would bring the end I won't say end of the world, but it would not be a bad thing, because biblically it was predicted that such a war would happen, and if you add nuclear weapons into the picture, the end of the earth is not a bad thing. As you saw from the rapture, one of the earlier stories, Christians would be saved. So you had nuclear anxiety, environmental disaster, and then you had this preoccupation with trying to explain all these things. And it could be from a religious perspective, belief in aliens. And then you had the complications of AIDS, which also appears in the comic. Reading through this comic, you have a lot of notes and letters and comments dealing with the environment. And the book is certainly a very pro-environmental book, and deep concern about not just nuclear weapons, but nuclear energy, pollution, and destruction of the environment in general. Now, after I read these books, I picked up these, the Turtle books, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And the reason I did, because the same team of Murphy and Zulli wrote and drew 3 issues of the Turtles. This is issue number 31. And then it skips to 35. And finally 36. And I read very, very little of the Turtle books, but it's my impressions they're not very serious books. These are very somber. There's no cowabunga or any kind of phrases like that in the book. And the artwork is extraordinary. This one, Kevin, I think Eastman does the introduction to. And basically the story starts out with Shredder out to destroy Splinter, who then has to summon the Turtles to help him fight Shredder. The Turtles are summoned and they fight, and one of them, the Turtles are never named, by the way, through the entire comic, and they have very little dialogue. And one of the Turtles, his hands, one of his hands is severed, and the rest of the story is, the rest of the other 2 issues, are what's going to happen to him. But the artwork again by Zulli is wonderful. But the tone of the stories is rather heavy. I believe these are collected in a graphic novel. I mean, a trade of these 3 stories. There's the turtle who had his hand cut off, yelling master. I had heard the name Zulli somewhere before, and I began looking through my magazines and books, and I came across this comics journal, issue 129, and I think it's from 1989. And this one is the one that discusses Rick Veitch and Swamp Thing. As many of you probably know, is after Alan Moore left, Rick Veitch took over the writing and drawing of the book. However, he quit the comic when he was going to do a story about the Swamp Thing traveling back to the crucifixion and meeting Christ. And what I did know was that Zulli, Michael Zulli, who just did the Puma Blues and Turtles, had drawn 18 pages of this comic book. And this article goes into what happened with the story and why Veitch quit. And then the people who were going to take over was going to be Neil Gaiman and Delano from Hellraiser. Once Veitch quit, they refused to do the book. Briefly, what happened was, I think Time Warner had taken over DC, and they were concerned that this book would offend some of the readers. Keep in mind that this is right before the Batman movie was going to come out, the Tim Burton film. And there had been films like The Last Temptation of Christ, which had offended some Christians, not all Christians, but a very vocal minority of Christians. And this was also the time when certainly evangelical Christians as voters, again, part of the Reagan Revolution, were a force to be reckoned with. Which really shouldn't matter with the comics, but now that comics were owned by a big corp, I guess owned by Time Warner, they were concerned. Now, Veitch had cleared the story for Swamp Thing, and it was fine. And until word got back to him that the editors had changed their mind. And the words that were used was that the political climate wasn't there. And they said that people would not accept a monster going back and meeting Christ. And that's when Veitch got really offended. He said, you have Batman is crucified there in one of the issues. In a Dr. Fate storyline, you have a man catching the blood of Christ, I guess with the Holy Grail. And I guess the most notorious was Mike Grell's run on Green Arrow. Now that's not artwork by Grell, but he wrote the script, where you have a woman who's been tortured and crucified and killed. And these comics were okay to publish. DC said these were fine. And albeit quite misogynist. But his storyline was not accepted. And this one says DC restricts Batman coverage. And what I didn't know either was that when Grant Morrison had done his Arkham Asylum, apparently there was concern that about the book and then the Tim Burton film. And so I think the book, according to this, was pushed back. I mean, I bought the book when it came out, and I just don't remember if it was before or after the film, the Burton film. But nevertheless, here, according to this, was pressure that the Morrison McKean book should be published after the film came out. Again, concerned that this was not the direction they wanted Batman to go in, and certainly was the early indicators of Hollywood and comics, and then comics on their own. So, in any event, the Puma Blues comic, worth getting. Really well done by Stephen Murphy and Michael Zulli. In the fall, it's going to be published in a trade with an introduction by Dave Sim, and I believe there's going to be an afterword, I think, by Stephen Bissett. And I'll add a link there from Dave Sim, who discusses the book. That's something I found on YouTube. Thank you for watching.